The chair of the House Democrats campaign team is not seeking a second term after the party underperformed and lost its chance to expand its majority. Illinois Representative Cheri Bustos says the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee will begin a transparent review to understand why House Democrats will hold a much slimmer majority next year. The party is unlikely to meet expectations, as many surveys showed Democrats were well ahead of their 2018 numbers nationwide. For more on the state of polling, I want to bring in David Graham. He's a staff writer for The Atlantic and joins me now from Durham, North Carolina. David, welcome. Great to have you with us. So, of course, you wrote your piece for The Atlantic sort of right after the election, when there seemed to be a much wider divide between the polling, at least for the presidential race, between the polling and the actual numbers. Have you revised some of that a little bit in light of the fact that as numbers continue to come in, it looks like, you know, not that Biden is going to reach those projected levels, but maybe they're not going to end up so far off?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a little bit what we expected. We saw this sort of blue shift coming, and the national polls were likely to be closer. This is, of course, what we had in 2016, too. These national popular vote polls are often not that far off. But what we had is major focus after 2016 on fixing state-level polls, making sure that these were better. And we still see those have missed by a lot. So there's a problem in the polling, and I think there's also just a problem in the way that the media and the public relate with the polls.
Definitely. So the polling, you know, you described it as a catastrophe, and it certainly was on many levels, because, like you said, you know, the political world bases so many things on polling. So are there theories yet? I know it's a little early to do a postmortem because all the votes have not yet come in, but are there some theories on what the pollsters got so wrong yet?
There are. And, you know, like you say, we don't know yet which of them are true or to what extent they're true. You know, the fundamental problem seems to be that pollsters understood roughly what the Democratic electorate would look like, but missed how many Republicans were going to turn out. Why that happened, we don't know. We don't know whether it's a case where there are these so-called shy Trump voters who simply wouldn't tell pollsters that they were supporting the president. Or maybe it was a case where simply the people who they needed to get on the phone didn't answer their phones, and so they misunderstood the electorate by missing these people. Maybe they didn't wait enough for these people. There's also a major miss on Hispanic voters. So there's a bunch of places where things could have gone wrong.
Yes. Yeah, I want to talk about the Hispanic voter in just a second, but one theory that I have heard floated is this theory that there's a lot of institutional distrust out there these days, and for some reason it's greater among conservative voters. So if somebody calls you up and wants to know your opinion, you know, and you're a conservative, you might be less likely to share that opinion than if you are, you know, a little bit more to the left. Is that a theory that you've heard as well?
It is a theory that's out there, and there's evidence to support the idea that there's institutional distrust, which, of course, those numbers come from polls, so you may doubt them, but we don't know yet what effect that might have had on these results.
Right. And so, of course, one of the sort of biggest blind spots was, as you pointed out, the Hispanic voter, which is in some areas, you know, the Hispanic voter who didn't even vote for Trump in 2016 is now voted for Trump. So it's one of the few demographics where there was actually an increase in support. Where do you think the polling totally missed the boat on that one?
You know, there's a couple places it could have gone wrong. I think a lot of it comes down to a sort of, you know, reductive demographic category. But what we see is there are real differences in the way Hispanic voters vote in different places. So a Hispanic voter in northern Florida and in southern Florida could be very different from a Hispanic voter in California or a Hispanic voter in Texas. You know, it's always been a problem to sample, to get good at numbers on the Hispanic population, partly because of sample numbers. Pollsters have often been wrong in the past. And there seems to have been a shift here in the electorate that they didn't account for and didn't expect when they weighted their totals for Hispanics in 2020.
Right. So how do you see these potential down ballot polling misses hurting political candidates and campaigns in their efforts to win seats? Do you think that it sort of wrongly allocated funding and focus?
You know, it's hard to say. I think what we see is there are so many Republican voters in so many places. You know, Republicans just got such good turnout that it's not obviously a case where a lot of money was misspent in the wrong places, although a lot of money was spent on races where Democrats lost. But I think that, you know, if candidates don't know what the electorate is going to look like and where voters are, they don't have a good sense of how to target the money they're getting in and where best to spend it. And that's going to be a continuing problem.
And what about the public and the press? How does a lack of polling accuracy, which then leads to a distrust of polling, hurt our ability to interpret elections?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we have this really sort of oracular expectations we've attached to the polling. And people watch places like 538 and the New York Times Upshot and the Economist forecast really obsessively, perhaps to the exclusion of other things that are important, questions of policy and what's actually going on the ground. So there's that distrust, I think, feeds into a vicious cycle. It also just imperils our ability to sort of understand who we are as a country and what people are thinking. And I think that's a real problem for democracy as well.
Right. We have to understand what is in the minds of Americans. All right. Well, David Graham of The Atlantic, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.